Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 104. I'm Dr. Kortni Alston. Thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here. So I'll share something with you. One of my favorite quotes is by Dr. Angelou. And you might have heard this before. She said, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." I love that quote. I love it. It says so much in regards to the value, right, of how we feel. I love how she referenced that people will forget what you said, but it's about how you feel. And one of the things that stands out to me as it relates to that quote is the value of making a person feel seen, or really the real power of empathetic listening. I will tell you, it's one of the core pillars of my self-care squad. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, a self-care squad is actually the collective of which I call many of my friends. And I say many because in various collectives, I may have different self-care squads. I may have some that are my friends that are maybe in academia. Then I have some friends in terms of my self-care squad that work in journalism because I'm a former television reporter and news director. I have friends that I've met during my time when I worked as a news director, or it might be because of different areas where I've worked, with friends that are in the DC area or New Jersey or New York, I'm from New Jersey. So it can have a variety of different dynamics. But what I love so much about my self-care squad that I affectionately call my friends, and I actually in my training sessions, I often share the importance of developing your self-care squad, the value of having positive relationships, is that it will help you and also your friends in terms of holding each other accountable as it relates to your well-being. And I love my self-care squad. And I should say my self-care squads. One in particular that I'm thinking about is one of my self-care squads within my friendship group. A big part of a big part of the platform that we leverage in terms of communicating happens to be texting. Granted, we get on the phone and we'll talk, and we also have our Google Hangouts with each other. We seem to love meeting via Google Hangout, but texting is really great because you might want to text something during your workday, or you might want to text something a little bit later. And what we have is like this 24-hour non-judgmental text support. And which means you can text no matter what time it is, just to get something off your chest, just to get something like off your mind or just out, right? And there's no judgment if it's done like 2-3 o'clock in the morning. Now, it doesn't mean that someone might be available to listen or to read the text, right? But it's also this safe space to be able to let it go and to share it. And so the friends I have in my life are highly empathetic, and they practice empathetic understanding and true empathetic listening. So you might be wondering, what is that? And why do I consider it a superpower? Well, I remember having a conversation with a friend some time ago, um, and I was suffering. I was sharing it with her. And the interesting part is, as I'm sharing, she started telling me what to do. But I told her that I simply just wanted to share. And she snapped at me and said, "Well, you just want someone to agree with you." But actually, what she didn't understand is that I didn't share to be fixed. I just shared to be heard. And so I told her I just wanted to share. I wanted to be seen. But what the interesting dynamic is that exchange taught me how she saw friendship. And it taught me the value of someone sharing and being able to create an environment where people can share to be seen and to feel supported, or just simply fixing it. And what I treasure about my friends in my life is that we don't try to fix each other. We just create safe spaces to share, to feel seen and supported. Our number one statement that we often share, and it's actually not even a statement, it's actually more like a question. And the question is, what can I do to support you? What can I do to support you? Opposed to, let me fix it. Or perhaps, let me fix it, and perhaps the suffering is going to go away, or maybe even the conversation will go away. So my friendships, in terms of our self-care squads, is all about allowing the person to share, allowing the person to feel safe, and allowing the person to feel and be supported. So this episode, I will hopefully have you reevaluate conversations like I did about that past conversation I had with a person that I was friends with at that time. And that made me also reevaluate how my friendships are now. And it will also make you feel comfortable with silence and creating a safe environment to allow a person to share without judgment. So here are some 7 tips that are provided by Crisis Prevention Institute. So here's the first one: be non-judgmental, which is letting go of your own opinions. And what I really value about Crisis Prevention Institute is that they share that letting go of your own opinions kind of frees you to focus on another person's perspective. Talk about refreshing. Talk about refreshing. That is so refreshing to me. And acknowledging a person's views and emotions, as I mentioned, it really helps you to help them. This doesn't mean you need to agree with everything the person says. It's about letting them know that you care and that they matter. That they matter. So that's number 1, be non-judgmental. Number 2 is give the person your undivided attention. Whew, that's a big deal. They share remove distractions. So really, to make sure that when you're spending time with that person, that there's, your devices aren't like going off and you're getting all these different notifications, but so they said, make sure there's no computers or devices between you and them. And they also mentioned giving the person your full focus really displays respect. And a person is more likely to stay calm when they feel respected. Now, it's interesting, when I was being trained for fellowship that I was granted when I worked in management as a news director, I remember going through all these different training activities. And one of the things that really, really resonated and always stuck with me, when I when I was actually a participant in those training sessions, one of the things that really stuck with me that I always remember that I really value, as they always mention, to make sure that you really gave undivided or give undivided attention to your team. So giving a person undivided attention really allows for this true dynamic in terms of really serving the person by actively listening, which is interesting because number 3 is all about listening carefully to feelings and facts. So Crisis Prevention Institute says you want to soak in the words as well as a larger view of that individual in that specific situation. They also mention really beginning to observe, notice the tone of the person's voice, maybe the body language, and other cues beyond the words. They kind of help you can gain insight into their emotion. And so I really love this in terms of really being able to really focus. But remember, when we go back to number 2, talking about undivided attention, number 3 really can allow us to really, as they mentioned, soak in the words, soak in the words. So number 4 is show that you're listening carefully. So it's about those nonverbal messages. So I mentioned that I worked as a reporter. I worked in television in various markets. And when I was out covering stories, it was always very important when I was interviewing individuals that they always knew that I was listening carefully, that I was, first off, honored for them to share their story with me and making sure that I saw them, making sure that they felt seen. And so you want to think about, your posture and nonverbals, right? And so, not giving someone eye contact may make them feel like, oh, well, are they really here with me? So they mentioned about creating or really displaying, body language that speaks to acknowledgement, which is eye contact, as I mentioned, nodding, and other signals as appropriate, to show that you are truly attentive. So, and you want to make sure you're doing this, as I mentioned, without like interrupting, right? Giving your, friend or, even maybe a coworker, might be in the workplace, your undivided attention without interruption. Number 5, don't be afraid of silence. How is that for you? How did you feel with just a couple of seconds of silence there? Don't be afraid of silence. I love that. Because sometimes, as I mentioned, that all a person needs is to be heard. I know that you're there. Does that sound familiar? By that earlier scenario that I shared at the beginning of the podcast. So pay attention to the context and really the quality of silence before responding. Because remember, the person may be thinking about what they're going to share, or it might be challenging for them to share the information as well. So there's a value in regards to just not being afraid of the silence, letting the silence just be there and being okay with silence, the silence. So I love number 5. There's so much value to number 5. I don't think number 5, in terms of don't be afraid of silence, is something that is discussed enough, but it can be so much power in silence, because even at that moment, you can think, wow, this person's really hearing me. Number 6, restate and paraphrase. So if you speak or refer to a person's words or maybe ask questions, you might want to have clarity in terms of comments as needed, but you want to keep it that where, again, you're not being judgmental. So it's non-judgmental. You're being respectful, having that respectful dynamic, giving a person time to respond. But remember, there's really no exact formula to all of this, because it's really important and impactful to respond best based on that person, right? And he also mentioned the situation and even the moment. And so now we've gotten to our moment at number 7, follow up. And I love what Crisis Prevention Institute shares in terms of this. He said, check with the person to see if they have further questions or comments and set up another time to meet if needed. I can certainly see that on both a personal, even a professional level, right? But one thing I love about my self-care squad is that we'll always check in. Hey, you had a bad day yesterday. How you doing today? Remember that question? Anything that I can do to support you? So that follow-up can be really powerful in terms of checking in or doing that wellness check or well-being check. I've actually done quite a few check-ins as a happiness scholar and training individuals in regards to well-being. And then I love having these check-ins to see how a person is doing. But what's great about the follow-up, it shows to me this real power and real value in regards to making sure the person is okay. So do you see now how powerful empathetic listening is? Do you see why I believe it is a great superpower? And after listening to this list, do you practice all of them? Maybe you practice a few of them. And if it's only a few, I want you to begin thinking about what will you adopt to strengthen your skills in empathetic listening? And then also, what will you do in terms of what that may look like at home or even at work? Well, I hope these tips give you really a lot to think about. And always remember this, your well-being is your most important job, and I'm always here to help. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drkortnialston.com. That's podcast@drkortnialston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.